And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. It is MLS tier time. With the international break, not as many games and major developments happening, I thought this would be a great time to kind of jump back into MLS and set the stage for the end of the regular season as we get closer and closer to the playoffs. So as always, when I do tiers, I've got 4 of them: underdogs, dark horses, contenders, favorites. A couple things I want to say right at the beginning here. One, this is based on MLS Cup aspirations. So it's not necessarily power rankings. And it is based in part on the playoffs and what the standings look like. If you have to play a bunch of road games, that factors into the conversation as opposed to you being a team that it looks like is going to get to play at home a lot in the playoffs. The other side of that is this is how I think the teams stack up in terms of their chances of winning MLS Cup. So just because you're third in the East right now or third in the West, and you'll see this with some of the way I've divided this, does not mean you're automatically one of the favorites. Because there are still teams that are not in the top 3 of either conference that I believe in. I'm going to sort of lay out why as we go through here. So starting with our underdogs. These are the teams technically maybe still hanging in there, but don't expect to be a factor in the conversation. And most of these teams are more or less just out of the playoff conversation at this point. Of course, it's MLS. Wild things can happen, but I have 6 underdogs: Chicago, Colorado, NYCFC, New York Red Bulls, Portland Timbers, Toronto FC. Going kind of in backwards order: Toronto, Red Bulls, NYCFC, Colorado. I just don't see them getting into the playoffs. And if you don't get into the playoffs, obviously, you can't win MLS Cup. Portland, it's going to be difficult. Just made a coaching change. But they are still in the mix in the West. Found a way to get a point against Seattle after being down 2-0. There is some positivity there to build on. I wouldn't be stunned if they made the playoffs. I don't see them doing anything if they get in. There's nothing about that team that terrifies me or makes me look at them and go, that's the team that's going on a run. And I know that's part of Portland's MO, is they're not typically a great Western Conference regular season team. And they show up and somehow, whenever the Sounders don't make MLS Cup, the Timbers have over that 5 or so year period before LAFC last season. But this is not that Timbers team. Defensively, it's been bad most of the season. You don't feel like their attack is all that dynamic. You don't have a Diego Valeri there to have that game where he's the best player on the field in the semifinals or something, Western Conference final or something. I just don't see a path to a deep playoff run for Portland. And the other team is the Chicago Fire. The Fire have this tendency to kind of tease you and think maybe they can make the playoffs, and then it kind of falls apart at the end. So I'm not holding my breath they're actually going to get in. But even if they do, I just, especially in the East, I just don't see a path forward for them. So those are my 6 underdogs, teams that wouldn't be shocked if 1 or 2 of them make the playoffs, but I'm not really even considering the possibility that any of them win MLS Cup. Next, we have the dark horses. So these are the teams that not going to pick them, but would not be absolutely floored if they find a way to make a deep run to get to MLS Cup, maybe even win it. I've got 10 of these: Atlanta, Austin, Charlotte, DC, Dallas, LA Galaxy, Minnesota United, Montreal, San Jose, Sporting Kansas City. And this is where I start talking about why I wanted to clarify things at the beginning, that this is my views on teams that can win MLS Cup. Because if you look at the table, Kansas City probably doesn't deserve to be in the dark horse category. But they are surging when most of the other Western Conference teams in this section are struggling. And I have been consistent from the very beginning. I absolutely love this team. I think they are going, if you ask me, I'm giving them better than 50% chance of making the playoffs with what they're doing right now. And the fact that just you had to get all the pieces there, and you had to get them gelled and kind of comfortable, and that is exactly what's happening. Maybe they don't have quite enough, but I'm not betting against this team now that they're rolling. And you do have the LA Galaxy playing a little bit better, getting some big wins recently, still hanging around the playoffs as well. But the rest of those teams in the West, Austin, Dallas, Minnesota, San Jose, not inspiring a lot of confidence at the end of the season. So that's part of why they're in this category as well, is you're probably going to have to play a bunch of road games, and now could change it in the next month, but none of them are really on an upward trajectory right now. To me, the team that is dangerous that I could see making a run is Kansas City. And then in the East, you've got the collection of Charlotte, DC, Montreal, just trying to make the playoffs. I love what Wayne Rooney is doing in DC. There's just a ceiling there. Same thing with Montreal and Charlotte. I just don't see a deep run. But I will put their chances of making the playoffs better than Chicago's, which is why they're dark horses, not underdogs. Because if you give yourself an opportunity, maybe something happens. The reason Atlanta is here is that I just have a mental hurdle trusting this team to be consistent enough to get to the final rounds of the playoffs, to go make a deep run. Defensively, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's a train wreck. Sometimes they score boatloads of goals, sometimes not so much. They're just too up and down for me. Wouldn't be a fun place to play a playoff game. Wouldn't be shocked if they have a really good game and knock somebody off. But I don't see putting together 3, 4, 5, 6, the kind of run that you need to get to MLS Cup and ultimately win it. So that's why they are in the dark horse category as well. Number 2 is the contenders, or the third section, second from the top. I've got 8 contenders: Houston, Miami, Nashville, New England Revolution, Orlando City, Real Salt Lake, Seattle, Vancouver Whitecaps. I will start with Miami and get this out of the way first. You cannot be a favorite when there is no guarantee you make the playoffs, when you're losing Lionel Messi to international duty, and even if you make the playoffs, you're going to have to go through the entire thing basically on the road, barring a very bizarre series of events. I will continue to say this part of it as well. This Miami team, if you take their road performances across the board, Leagues Cup, MLS play, to me, that is not good enough to win MLS Cup. They had to go to a shootout with Dallas and kind of rescue that game late. They had to have a shootout with Nashville. Eventually, you're going to lose one of those shootouts. It's not like they just went on the road and dismantled every single team they played. Now, the part that makes this interesting is they did go to Philadelphia and win, and they did go to LAFC and win. They can go beat anybody in any venue at any time. So they have to at least be contenders. Anything less than that is incredibly disrespectful. But I can't make you a favorite if I don't even know that you're going to make the playoffs. If this was starting from scratch and you told me they were getting in, then absolutely they're a favorite. But their road is not going to be like everybody else's in that favorite category. And as good as they've been, I still have not seen enough to convince me that they can go win road game after road game after road game after road game, often against the best teams in this league who will now have seen them before. Houston, 5 consecutive clean sheets and 10 goals scored in those 5 games, 3 wins, 2 draws. Ben Olsen is doing a terrific job. That roster is sneaky good. In a West that's just kind of been blah, they're running right up the table. Again, I'm not making them a favorite, but they deserve at least contender status. They are better than most of the teams who are going to enter the playoffs in the West, especially if they keep this going and continue to play this well and are in such good form heading into the playoffs. I want to save Nashville for last. Revolution, Orlando, Salt Lake, Vancouver. Pretty much just the same story for all of them, which is if I am one of the other teams that's going to be competing with them for those top spots, going to have to face them hypothetically in the later rounds of the playoffs, I'm just not that scared. The ceiling is not there for me. It doesn't mean they can't win. And obviously, RSL have had some playoff success pulling upsets. It's a little different if you're more of a 4 or 5 seed rather than the final team getting in. Orlando have, just won a U.S. Open Cup. Just won in Cincinnati. Revs have been good this season. And the Whitecaps, I do think they get slept on a little bit. I do think they're actually going to do it this time and put together a really solid season, but not hold my breath about a playoff run. I just can't convince myself that they are true favorites to win. Difficult outs, yes. But if I am, for example, Cincinnati, and you're asking me who I want to play in the Eastern Conference Final, who I want to end up finishing second, those in the East, those kind of things, I'm picking Orlando and New England before I want Miami, before I want Philly, before I want Columbus, and before I even want Nashville. And then real quick on the Sounders before I get to Nashville. Sounders are just having a weird season. In a very different way than last season was weird, but they're going to be right up there, near the top of the West. And also, there's just nothing particularly convincing about what they've done this season. To me, it's more of a story of the rest of the West struggling than it is the Sounders being that good. So yes, you've got to respect them. Obviously, they know how to do this. But this is not a Sounders team that woke up halfway through the year and then all of a sudden, from August on, looks like the best team in the league. Those teams typically make it to MLS Cup and they often win it. That's not the story here. It's a team that just blew a 2-0 lead to the Portland Timbers. And yes, the red card had something to do with that, but still. So that's why they are not in my favorites category either. Nashville. Nashville is the one team I feel like I bumped up significantly from where the standings suggest they should be. Oh, and outside Inter Miami, of course, which Inter Miami have their own rules at this point. So I will continue to say this and be consistent with it. I do not care how much they have been struggling. I don't care what seed they are. I want no part of that Nashville team in the playoffs, especially if Sam Sturridge really gets going. To me, he can be the most impactful summer signing in the playoffs. Now, if Miami make it, obviously it's Messi. But if you just kind of exclude Messi from the conversation because he's just on his own level, if they can just get one more productive striker and just turn things around here. They have played Miami really, really well twice. That is what they can do. They are built to play in knockout tournaments. You get one more difference maker in attack, get everybody healthy. I know Walker Zimmerman's missed some games here. I will forever believe in this team's ability. Am I going to pick them to go through a gauntlet that's probably going to involve 2 to 3 of the 5 favorites I have? No. But if you're telling me a team has to win 2 road games to get out of the East, and you make me pick somebody, if Miami don't make it, I'm picking Nashville. So I had to put them as a contender. To me, as long as they make it, they have a real chance to win this thing because of how balanced they are, how good they are defensively, and just the way they play. They are built to frustrate teams, to make games really difficult, to keep Lionel Messi in check, and to give themselves the kind of opportunities they gave themselves in those 2 games against Miami. And then, as I alluded to, 5 favorites, 3 from the East, 2 from the West. Obviously Cincinnati, Columbus Crew, LAFC, Philadelphia Union, St. Louis City. Cincinnati has to be here. Don't really need to explain that. And the Crew are finally looking the part. This is the team I thought they would be all along. These were my 2 teams heading into the season, Columbus and Kansas City. I'm a big Wilfred Nancy guy. It's all starting to come together. They just haven't been quite as good as I thought, but they're getting there. They are the kind of team that if you peak at the right, they could peak at the right time here. And if they just keep going, they were not the best team in the league from start to finish. But they might be the best team in the league by the time MLS Cup ends. And you just go, I mean, they were playing the best of anybody. Kind of like the NCAA tournament, right? It's not that the best team always wins, but you can also look back at a tournament where the best team didn't win and say, that's a deserving champion. UConn last season, perfect example. That is actually a really good analogy for how I feel about Columbus now that I'm thinking about it. There were times where you just went, that's the best team in the country. And then they fell apart and you kind of wondered what happened. And then they woke back up and figured it out and just demolished people in the NCAA tournament. And you go, I don't know if they were the best team in the country, but they were clearly the best team in the tournament. That's, to me, what Columbus can be. I am 100% on board with this. The other thing I will say, though, is... Actually, before I get to that part, just to address the other couple teams here. Any team with LAFC's roster and LAFC's pedigree automatically gets in this group. I don't care where they finish. I know they haven't been good this season. I'm the first person to harp on that. And how fortunate they have been and the missed opportunities they've had to really cement themselves here by picking up a bunch of trophies and barely getting the... I have been critical of LAFC. But they're absolutely a favorite. Because they can just turn it on at any time. And the thing Steve Cherundolo has done is turn this team into a multi-dimensional force that can win games multiple ways. That's what you have to be to succeed. That's why they won MLS Cup last season. So obviously they're in there. And then any team that has home field through MLS Cup, or through the conference finals, is also here. So congratulations, St. Louis City. They're in great position to win the West. I think that's what's going to happen. And you look down at the rest of the teams, and none of them really scare you. Does it mean that they're going to make it to MLS Cup? Not necessarily. I'm not sure I'm going to pick them. I got to see how things go. But if you just have to win home games to get to MLS Cup, you're automatically a favorite. And then the Union are going to be there because they don't lose playoff games at home. They generally don't lose at home. They're battle tested. They found a way to get through last season, nearly beat LAFC in LA. I mean, you don't really need to explain why the Union are there. So those are my 5. The one thing I will throw out there that is, to me, going to be potentially the storyline of the playoffs and one of the storylines for the end of the regular season in terms of how the playoffs set up. If Cincinnati and Philly finish 1-2 in the East with the 2 best records in MLS, which I would expect to happen, I do not like anybody's chances of having to get through one or both of them. To me, if they meet each other that is the game. Now, of course, Miami could do this and make things real interesting if they have to go through both of them and then another team on the road to win MLS Cup. But specifically from the Western Conference standpoint, or if you are Miami, if you're Columbus, if Nashville puts to Orlando, whoever, the idea of having to play one of those teams on the road in the conference semis, play the other one in the conference final, or if you're St. Louis, hypothetically winning the West, to know that you have to go play one of those two teams probably on the road. And this is no guarantee because the Union are not in second right now. It's very close between them, Orlando, and the Revs. But I expect the Union to come out on top of that. And I wouldn't even be floored if the Union make the Supporters' Shield race interesting. It is closer than you think based on what the table says right now. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Cincinnati's coming to Philly when MLS play resumes. After the international break. Not this weekend, but the weekend after that. If the Union win that game, this might get interesting. But if those teams finish 1-2 and they finish with the best records in the league so that they're home field priority over all the Western Conference teams, you're going to have a hard time convincing me somebody pulls that off. Unless they somehow both lose. But if they're 1-2, which means that they don't meet until the conference final, and at that point, one of them is guaranteed to host MLS Cup, I just have a real hard time. I could see Miami doing it. I could see Columbus doing it. I could see LAFC doing it. I could see potentially Seattle and maybe Nashville. And that's about it. So that is the other storyline and main thing I'm watching with these favorites is how does this all shake out the rest of the regular season here? Do you get those Eastern Conference teams stacked, whether it's 2, whether it's 3, that finish with the best records in the league? Because the best teams in this league play in the East right now. LAFC have not been great. I mean, the expansion team is winning the Western Conference right now. With all due respect to St. Louis City. That just doesn't scare you the same way Cincinnati, who looked almost unbeatable at home and who have been so dangerous, in the Union with everything they've accomplished the past few seasons. So that's one of the big storylines I'm looking at is, can those two teams in particular, who are so good at home, wrap up home field advantage to the extent that they can? Obviously, they can't both have it in the East. But can they go 1-2 and just make everybody else's life really, really difficult? That if you just win your home games, one of you is playing and hosting MLS Cup. So that is MLS Tiers heading into the stretch run of the regular season here.